Hello. For this Excel video tip today, we're going to be doing a practical application using text functions. Um, all the functions that we're going to use here, there is a separate video discussing the function and the things that go into it. And what I'd like to do here is just kind of tie all that together and show you a practical application of where you may use these functions. So to help us illustrate that, the data that I've got here is in column C. I've got name, which is in last name, comma, first name format. And what I want to be able to do is pull out and separate the last name and the first name out of this data into separate columns. So to help us do that, we're going to need a couple of things. We're going to use the len function and the find function, and there's some other functions. And I just put together a couple of videos on len and find. So if you haven't watched len or find or left, mid, right, those type of functions, you want to familiarize yourself with those before you really go into the practical application here. So the first thing that I want to do is to be able to pull out the last name, and the last name is on the left. And so the easiest way to do that is to use a left function. So if I want to do a left, just as a reminder, we're going to type equals left and open parentheses, and it's asking for text and number of characters. So the text is where you're looking or what you're looking in, and number of characters is how many characters long you want it to be. So in this example, I'm going to be looking in this cell, and the number of characters, and the way I found this for me that works is I want to first find out for this specifically, and then I want to be able to make it dynamically for when I drag down. So in this specific case, I only want to return Jones, which is J1, 02, 3, 4, which is 5 characters. So for right now, I'm just going to type in a 5 and close parentheses. So you'll see it returns just Jones, which works perfectly fine in this case. The problem is when I drag it down, it doesn't work. So one thing that I found that's very useful is to nest functions. I want to be able to put a function in here so that 5 changes based on what's in C2. And if I'm not familiar with nesting functions, what I found is if I just choose a different cell and put my formula in there, then I can cut that formula out and nest it inside. The formula that I want it to be is to show how many characters to include. So I'm going to use cell G2, and I want this to be able to know how many characters come before the comma. Well, if you remember from our find video, I found where the comma was located, which in this case was a 6. And you remember here, I want everything before that comma. So it would just be where the comma is minus 1. So I'm going to copy this formula out. Then just do a Control C, and I'm going to paste it in here, and you'll see it returns a 6. But if I just do a minus 1, that does a 5. So that tells me I want to include or how many characters come before the comma. Now, if I want to nest this function inside here, I'm just going to copy everything but the equal sign and do a Control C to copy, and then come and paste it, delete that 5, and then paste in that formula that I just did. And now, if I drag it down, you'll see that it pulls out just the last name. So I was able to isolate everything to the left of the comma with this nested function. So that's how I pull out the last name. Now, the first name is a little trickier because it starts in a different spot. This one always started right at the left. This one's going to start in a different spot. And so I'm going to use the mid function. So to do that, I'm going to do equals mid and open my parentheses, and you'll see that it's asking for text, a start number, and number of characters. So the text is where I'm looking, and then a comma, and the start number is how far over do you want to start? Well, in this case, I want to start on this J. And I know that the comma was in the 6th position, so the space would be the 7 and the J would be the 8. I'm just going to, for now, type in an 8. And then number of characters is how many characters do I want to include? And in this one, I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, because there's 4 characters in John. So for now, I'm going to put in a 4 and close my parentheses. And you'll see that it returns John, which in this case, again, works perfectly fine. The problem is if I drag that down, doesn't work, right? So now I'm going to work on nesting my function. So I need to know the start nom and the number of characters. So let's just do this, and I'm just going to type these up for right now to help me, because I've got 2 functions that I've got to nest in here. Okay, so to determine where we want to start, remember in this case it was 8. And if I look at this example, it's always going to be 2 spaces after the comma, because there's a comma and then a space. Well, I know where the comma is, which was this, so I'm just going to copy this whole thing out, and I'm going to put it in here, and then add 2 to it. So it returns an 8. Now if I want to nest that within my function, I'm going to copy everything but the equals, because when you nest function, you won't include the equals. I'm going to copy that and delete the 8, and now paste that function in there. You'll see that this one still works. It still returns John. Now, I now need to determine how many to include here. So I basically need to know from J to the end of the cell. So to help me determine how many characters, if I think about what I want to do here, I want to take however many total characters are in here, and I only want to include how many are to the left of the start here. Well, I know that the comma in this case is in the 6th position, and that finds that, but I also want to take off 1 more, so I really need to find the position of the comma, or excuse me, the space after the comma, which is just wherever the comma is plus 1. So I take the total length minus where the comma is, minus 1 more. That should return the last name. So let's try that. I know that my I know my total length is 11. So let's just take that formula, and we'll put that in here. And I want to subtract wherever that comma was. Excuse me, let's try that again. Sometimes you get messed up, and if that happens, it's okay. You can just start over. So I want to take the total length, so I'm going to copy this whole formula, and I'm going to paste it in here, okay? And then I want to subtract where the comma is, so I'm going to take this whole formula, but I'm going to leave the equals off because now I'm doing 2 functions in one thing here. So I'm going to take the total length minus where the comma is, and then take out 1 more because I don't want the space before there either. And then I hit enter, and that returns a 4. And if you remember, in this case it was 4. So if I take this whole double function here, copy that out, go back to my original, take out the 4 and paste that in, it returns John. Now, if I've done this correctly, as I drag this down, I'm only going to return the first name. So if we drag that down, and I've done it right. Now, this is a pretty complicated one. You can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different functions all built within one. But now, if I were to ever change the name in here, this should update automatically. So for example, if I do Jackson, Bo, works perfectly. So that's a dynamic function now that should update automatically. So that's one example of a practical application in using text functions to be able to extract first and last names out of a cell, and it would work for anything. The key thing here is I've got something that delineates between the 2 things that I'm looking at. In this case, it's a comma and a space. So that's today's practical application around text function and extracting first and last names from a single cell. And that's today's Excel video tip. Have a great day. Thanks.